Hey, what's up guys? Hardleg Joe here with the profile for my budget Lair Infernoid deck, an inexpensive twist on a competitive rogue deck that seeks to go second and tear apart the opponent's field with brutal efficiency. This is easily one of the most powerful decks I've played in a long while, fully capable of going toe-to-toe with this format's meta, as long as it doesn't brick. Now, if you just want to see this thing in action, you'll want to check out the main What a Deck video, linked down in the description. There, I'll be playing 10 duels against random opponents, showing off how this thing works. Otherwise, I'm just here to go card by card and explain what everything does and why we play it. Starting off with our monster lineup, we have 1 Baby Driver, 2 Dark Hole on legs, 2 Heavy Storm on legs, a Tondel, Saitama, the level 6 one, 2 MST on legs, 2 Fissure on legs, 3 of the dang old Gamma Slamma, 2 Compulse on legs, and 3 Jontron. For spells, we've got 141, 3 of that card that mills half the deck, 1 of the other cards that mills half your deck, Terraformin, Forlish, 3 Counter, 3 Infernoid Polymerization, 3 Infernoid Fusion Sage, and 3 of the Lod. Our only trap is 1 big old Thanksgiving Feast of Void. Our extra deck consists of the other card that mills half your deck, and Omega, Borolo, Decode, Unicorn and Max, Phoenix, Cerberus, and Psyframe hacks, a Fat Fire Cat, and a wee little witch, and top it all off with a Beat Cop, bitch! The side deck I'll go over a little later, though mostly it's just other options to consider if you want to make this deck more expensive or even more budget. As for the main deck, it's a fairly standard Infernoid build. If you're unfamiliar with the archetype, it's a bunch of fire fiends with weird themes. With the exception of their level 1 monster, Decatron, none of the Infernoids can be normal summoned or set. They can only be special summoned, and only by their own inherent effects. The levels 2, 3, and 4 Infernoids can only be summoned from your hand, and only by banishing 1 Infernoid from your hand or graveyard. The levels 6, 7, or 8 can be summoned from your hand or graveyard, but they require you to banish 2 Infernoids. Your 2 boss monsters, levels 9 and 10 respectively, can also be summoned from the hand or graveyard, but they require 3 Infernoids to be banished. I mention all their levels because they're actually really important here. You can only summon Infernoids if the combined levels and ranks of all your effect monsters is 8 or lower. This means, among other things, that if you want to get out multiple monsters, you need to summon the lower level ones first, and then the big guys. Also, since your bosses are over level 8, you won't be able to summon anything after you've summoned them, which is kind of a pity because this guy over here, Anuku, he destroys all monsters on the field when he's summoned, which is great, don't get me wrong, but it would be nice if you could pile on damage after nuking the field. As for the rest of them, they have effects as well. Your other boss, Deviati, blows up all spell traps when she's summoned, except for void cards, which are what the Infernoid spell traps are called for some reason. Your sub-bosses, as I'm going to call them, all have attack-based effects. A Tondel can attack again if it destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard. Siaitsamas can non-targeting banish a card at the end of the battle phase if it attacked a monster, which is more useful than it sounds. And Sijet is level 6. It has an effect, you can read it if you want, but we mostly play it because it's level 6. I'll explain later. As for the little Infernoids, Pat destroys a spell trap, Dick destroys a monster, and Harry sends a card back to the hand. They can do this once per turn, and if they do, they can't attack. Got it? Okay, good, because they all have one more effect, which is themed around tributing. During your opponent's turn only, as a quick effect, your little baby Infernoids can tribute a monster to banish a card in your opponent's graveyard. Your Onichan Infernoids can do the same thing, but they can do it during either player's turn.
This is important. Remember this for later.
As for your Big Papa Infernoids, they can negate shit. The one that destroys all the spell traps can tribute to negate a monster effect. The one that destroys all the monsters can tribute to negate a spell trap effect. They negate and banish, by the way, which is much better than negate and destroy in most cases, all by tributing any monster you control, including themselves if need be. Speaking of tributing, Lair of Darkness. All monsters become dark. Once per turn, if you attribute a monster, you can tribute a dark monster your opponent controls, even though you do not control it. And all monsters are dark. Do you see the synergy? Do I need to spell it out? You can tribute your opponent's monster as cost to negate their spell. It's pretty nice. You can also tribute your opponent's monsters to activate any of these other effects, or to activate Monster Gate, one of the best spells in the deck. Basically, tribute a monster, then mill cards from the top of your deck until you get one that can be normal summoned, and special summon it. Now there are exactly 4 cards in this deck that can be normal summoned, your 3 Decatrons and the 1 Psyframe driver, which means if you resolve this, you're most likely going to put about a fourth of your deck into the graveyard. All your best cards can be summoned out of the graveyard by banishing cards out of the graveyard, so the more you put into the graveyard, the more powerful you will become. On top of that, you will most likely be summoning Decatron off this, which I haven't even explained yet, but trust me, is pretty great. If Decatron is summoned, send an Infernoid from your deck to the graveyard, and if you do, Decatron gains its levels, name, and its effects. Need a card removed from the field? Send one of your low-level Infernoids and use its effect to bounce or pop a card. Need one of your boss monsters in the graveyard so you can summon it? Just send it off of Decatron. If you send one of the middle children, you'll be able to tribute off your Decatron to banish a card in your opponent's graveyard, leaving your field free of those pesky levels. Perhaps best of all, though, if you're going first, you can send either one of your boss monsters, and Decatron gains its effect to negate by tributing. This is actually the entire reason why we play Void Feast. This is a trap that says, send 1 Void spell trap to the grave, then special summon up to 3 Infernoids from your deck, whose levels equal exactly 8, ignoring their summoning conditions. This is why we play the level 6 people. Level 6 plus 2 level 1 Decatrons equals 8. If you go first, you can activate this, put 2 negates and a DD Crow on your field while setting up the graveyard with your boss monsters for next turn. It's pretty good! This is a go second deck, so we only play the 1 Void Feast for emergencies, but the side deck has 2 more copies, as well as Trap Trick to search it, because Void Feast Stun is a pretty damn good win condition and a solid deck on its own. It's worth mentioning that you can also search this with Void Vanishment. This actually lets you search any Void card, except itself and Nolan Void, by discarding a card, although it locks you into Infernoids for the turn, probably because of this other great Void card, Void Imagination. This is a continuous spell card with 2 great effects. First, all Infernoids become level 1 on the field, allowing you to summon to your heart's content. The battle damage inflicted to your opponent is cut in half, which kinda sucks, but it's offset by the fact that you get so many monsters. Its second and more powerful effect, though, is that you can send it to the graveyard to fusion summon Infernoid Tierra, a big honkin' god card that requires both of your other boss monsters, plus 1 or more other Infernoids. Now, normally you can only fusion summon using cards from your hand or field, but if your opponent controls a monster that was summoned from the extra deck, you can send 6 cards from your deck as material. This is why we go second. Even if Tierra had no effect, it would be worth it to run her and this, just because foolishly burying 6 cards from the deck, including both your boss monsters, is a pretty amazing effect. Fortunately though, Tierra does have an effect, and it's pretty great. It actually gains multiple effects depending on how many monsters you use for its fusion summon. If you use at least 3, which is the minimum, each player must send 3 cards from their extra deck to the graveyard. This is why we play Entis, because she destroys a card when she goes to the graveyard, making Tierra an easy +3 in addition to all the graveyard setup. You can also use one of these destructions to pop Tierra itself in order to rid your field of levels and allow you to swarm with the Infernoids you just sent. In addition, if you use 5 or more monsters, both players can mill 3 cards from their deck, which is usually pretty useful. If you use 8 or 10 monsters, then other stuff happens, but normally you only fusion summon this with 6, so they aren't worth mentioning. Read them on your own time. And that's pretty much the main core of the deck. You have a toolbox of removal that includes bouncing, tributing, banishing, and several different forms of destruction, all attached to some big beefy monsters that can often OTK. And even when they don't, you can back it up with negates and recover by playing straight out of the graveyard. Speaking of OTKs though, there's a really neat one you can do with Crusadia Equimax. Its effect is that it gains the combined attack of all monsters it points to, but the monsters it points to can't attack. So what you do is summon 2 high attack Infernoids to the zones it points to, including one of your sub-bosses. This should give Equimax well over 6,000 attack and allow it to beat over anything your opponent has. After you attack with it, you can then tribute it with one of these Infernoid's quick effects to banish a card in your opponent's graveyard. Since Equimax no longer points to them, your 2 big beat sticks are now free to attack as well, which should be more than enough for lethal, even if your opponent still has other monsters on the field. Especially if you have a Tondul, who again can attack twice. Other than that, the rest of your extra deck is mostly just a toolbox. The Nightmares, Decode, and Borreload are all entirely optional. You can cut them if you want to save more money. All the Infernoids are fire, which makes Chimera a good choice, unless you have Lair out, in which case you want to go with Wee Witch, because everything is dark now. Beat Cop is also good with Lair, since it can tribute a monster to put a protective counter on something, allowing you to tribute your opponent's monsters to save Lair from your own Deviati. Finally, there's just Lamba and Omega, which are here because we play a small Psy-Frame package. Gamma is the optimal hand trap in this build because it can't be normal summoned, meaning cards like Monster Gate and Reasoning will pass right by it. It's also great because we have a lot of power spells like Monster Gate and Reasoning, as well as the Void Fusion, which you can activate with no monsters on the field, meaning if your opponent tries to negate them with Ash Blossom or Savage Dragon or something, you can negate their negation while getting a free Omega in the process. And of course, Omega can remove itself from the field whenever it wants, so its levels aren't a problem. As for the rest of the main deck, 1-for-1 searches your Decatron, Terraforming searches your Lair, Foolish Burial searches any of your Infernoids really, and our only main tech card is Called by the Grave, because it can stop your Decatron or your Monster Gate from being ashed when you don't have Omega. All that leaves is the rest of the side deck then, which as I said earlier, is mostly just other options to consider. If you want to make this deck more expensive, play the meta version of it. You can put in Pot of Extravagance. Works excellent with this deck. You just got to put a couple more Tiaras in to make sure you don't banish them. Infinite Impermanence is another hand trap that won't mess with Monster Gate. Also very useful for breaking you out of something like Vanity's Fiend, which can really shut down this deck pretty hard. Almirage can get rid of a Decatron that's already used its effect. And Borreload adds another OTK to your arsenal. Alternatively, if you want to make the deck less expensive, Super Poly and Starving Venom combo really well with pretty much any deck that mains Lair of Darkness, since everything is dark, although the fusion's levels kind of interfere with your ability to summon, which is why I didn't play it. A Slash Draw can help with consistency. It lets you put back some spells you milled, while potentially adding more monsters to the graveyard. Soul Absorption, if you want to be that guy. Legendary Maju Garzit can help you OTK if you can't afford the other extra deck monsters, and it doesn't mess with Reasoning. And Curse Necrofear can be a fun recovery card if you go into the grind game, or if you just want to make this deck more goofy and gimmicky. Regardless, there's the deck. Like the video if you liked it, comment if there's any changes you would make, and subscribe if you want more strange deck profiles. I do one of these about every other week. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, good luck and have fun.